Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. It's estimated that the number of tweets in Arabic has increased 2,000% in the last year. And of course, we all know the reason why. It's been another extraordinary week, and many of you have been sharing your experiences and analysis of what's happening in the Arab world. On today's World Have Your Say, we'll be live in Tahrir Square to discuss if the Egyptian army should hand over power now. We'll go to Yemen as well to get your reaction to President Saleh becoming the fourth leader to stand down since these uprisings began. And we'll be joined by Bahrainis, Tunisians, Moroccans and Libyans to discuss if the reforms they've seen promised and in some cases delivered have met their expectations. We're live as ever. You can get us on Google+, Facebook and Twitter. You can also email, text and call the programme. With your help, we'll bring ourselves right up to date with everything that's happening across the Arab world. And we're across all the main hashtags being used today, including Tahrir Abbasiyya, which is referring to the square where a pro-SCAF rally is taking place in Cairo, and also Arab Spring. You can also use the WHYS hashtag if you want to comment as you watch, and you can get me on Twitter at BBC Ros Atkins. Now let's look across the latest from the region, starting in Egypt, where at least 100,000 people are in Tahrir Square. They're demanding an end to military rule. It's been confirmed that the former Prime Minister Kamal Ganzouri is to head a new interim government and that parliamentary elections will begin on Monday. Within the last hour, Syria's armed forces have said that 6 elite military pilots have been killed in an ambush. In a rare televised statement, the military said the attack happened on Thursday in Homs province and that it marked a dangerous escalation in the conflict. Earlier today, an Arab League deadline forced Syria to allow in observers passed with no response from Damascus. Outside of the Arab world, a UN envoy for North Korea has appealed for more humanitarian aid to be delivered to the country. South Korea has been sending medical supplies to the north over the past few weeks, but it won't say food. It says there's a risk that food will be diverted to feed the North Korean army. Prosecutors in the Philippines have called for the former president, Gloria Arroyo, to be moved from hospital to police detention. This is following her arrest on vote rigging charges. Mrs. Arroyo was denied permission to leave the Philippines last week when she attempted to travel for medical treatment overseas. And the Australian government plans to establish the world's largest marine reserve in the Coral Sea. It's proposing new fishing limits and a ban on oil and gas exploration. This is over an area nearly 1 million square kilometres. This is all northeast of the Great Barrier Reef, an area that is home to many unique and endangered species. Well, this is the scene right now in Tahrir Square. You can see the 100,000 or more protesters who are there demanding an end to military rule in Cairo. It's worth adding, it's not the only protest to be taking place. Thousands of people have turned out in support of SCAF, or the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces in Egypt. Those are the people in charge of Egypt at the moment. I can see that many tweets are coming in with either the hashtag Abbasiyya or the hashtag Tahrir. Karim says, Egyptian TV is bringing Tahrir from a very narrow angle while showing Abbasiyya from a wide one, therefore trying to equalise the numbers. Gemini 2359 says, not looking good, military helicopters flying over Tahrir Square. And I saw a tweet from the producer who's with our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. They are at the Abbasiyya rally. She said every time a helicopter went over that rally, everyone cheered. Clearly they're not getting that reaction in Tahrir Square. Tamer tweets us, again using the Tahrir hashtag, Khalid Saeed's mother and sister arrive in Tahrir Square. Mother wearing a locket with his iconic photo, people kissing her hand and forehead. Khalid Saeed was a young man who died at the hands of the security forces earlier this year in Alexandria. Now let's have a look at, let's hear from a couple of those people at the pro-SCAF rally. We can try and pull up some of the, it's a rally in Cairo. Let's have a look at this.
I am here to show support for the military and the police force and for my country. We would die for Egypt, We're prepared to die in support of Egypt's ruling military council and the police. There are also martyrs in the police force, like there are in Tahrir Square.
The military and the people of Egypt are as one. We have a lot of sons and family members serving in the military, and we are saying to Tantawi that what is happening in Tahrir is a conspiracy against the Egyptian army, and we urge him not to compromise.
I can see one American journalist. I'll play you a little bit of what the new interim Prime Minister had to say in just a moment. But one American journalist is saying a senior Muslim Brotherhood person is telling young people in Islamia the youth wanted to participate in Tahrir Square, but we have proved to them it's a bad idea. And don't forget, the Muslim Brotherhood thinks these protests will disrupt the elections that begin on Monday. Now, I was mentioning Kamal Ganzouri. He was Prime Minister under Hosni Mubarak in the 90s. Well, he's interim Prime Minister now, and he's been addressing the nation in the last couple of hours.
I have asked the Free Field Marshal to take some time so that I'll be able to form a government that will satisfy the whole people. I've come here to serve these people because I am one of them. The real arbiter about the formation of a cabinet is how we will form a government that will achieve the aspiration of this country, and at the same time it will be accepted by everybody.
And wherever you're watching, especially if you're watching in the Arab region, remember you can phone us up and help us tell this extraordinary story, well, many extraordinary stories in particular. If you are watching in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt or Syria, you're very welcome to get in touch. Also curious to hear from those of you in Morocco. Have you voted today? There are rumours that the elections will see a slow turnout, and that's come after the king has introduced reforms, low turnout arguably, which show that some people are not convinced. But I'm very curious to hear from you. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72 is the number. Here's a post from Jamal in Cairo. He's posted at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. He writes, "The lack of security means fair elections cannot be held. This scene has been set by the military long before they hijacked the revolution." That's interesting because, as I was saying, the Muslim Brotherhood has come out and said the protests are undermining the security of these parliamentary elections. And I can see that Matt Bradley, the Cairo correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, has tweeted, "Thousands in Abbasiyah Square chanting, 'The people want the Field Marshal to stay.'" They're talking about Field Marshal Tantawi. He, of course, is the head of SCAF, the ruling military council. Let's bring in Sharif. She's live with us from, he's live with us, I apologise, from Cairo. Sharif, tell us your view of the protests. Are they making a fair point?
Actually, I just want to make a first point that I was one of the people who demonstrated on the 25th of Jan until the 28th, and I was even shot by the police on the 28th. However, I do think that the protests in Tahrir now are not making any sense.
Why not?
Because when we went out on the 25th, because there was a monopoly of power, and we wanted to be able to select our own government, parliament and president. And that's happening in 3 days where we're entering parliamentary elections. I don't see how protesting right now, 3 days ahead of the elections, is going to solve anything.
So you're unconvinced. Let's bring in Susie. She's half British, half Egyptian, and I understand Susie's not there. In the meantime, let me bring in Kareem, who's a Libyan in London. Hi, Kareem. What's your view of what's happening in Egypt? Do you think the protesters are right to push on from the reforms they achieved in February?
What I think is happening here is essentially a flexing of muscles. It seems to me that the young people who were behind the uprising and the revolution in Egypt have sensed that the SCAF is not delivering enough, they're not moving quickly enough, and they're frustrated. And these protests that we see in Tahrir are a demonstration of that frustration. And the interesting thing that I heard was that a lot of people who are actually protesting are still planning to actually vote in the upcoming elections, but they want to make their voices heard and want to express their frustration, and they want to, let SCAF know that they're there and they're watching how things develop, and they, demand real change.
It's worth saying that SCAF have come out again and again reiterating they're not interested in who wins the elections, they're just interested in those elections happening. Clearly the people in Tahrir Square aren't convinced about that. We can speak to Susie now, which is good news. She's half British, half Egyptian, has lived in Cairo for the last 15 years. Susie, what do you make of what's happening in Tahrir Square?
What's happened today, I feel extremely positive. It's very refreshing to see. There's been a sea change today. We've seen more people out, more representative of how the majority feels. I feel that Egypt is on the road to democracy, and it has quite a long way to go. I feel that there cannot be true democracy, whatever true democracy may be. There is no agreement on universal definition of democracy, and yet there can be no democracy, equality, freedom, and to a certain extent, mass pluralism. And
That's a shame. You've frozen there, Susie. You may be able to hear me, but we can't see you, or can't at least see you moving. Thanks for those points, though. We'll get back to you and sort out that line. Let's switch from the part of Cairo you're in to Tahrir Square. We can speak to Norhan, who has been protesting down there. And Norhan, I hope you can hear me over all the noise. Tell me why you are in the square.
There are millions. We're millions. The square is very, very crowded, and so are the streets that are leading to it. People are too many, actually. This is the real revolution.
And what do you want to achieve?
What we want to achieve is throwing the military council. We do not want any more military ruling. We trusted them, we gave them our trust, and we gave them everything. We celebrated them in the February the 11th, and they failed us. They've been killing us for 5 days. This cannot go unpunished. They could have stopped the killing with a phone call, and they did not. What we want is all military ruling to go.
And Norhan, do you want the opposition, do you want people to take part in the elections on Monday?
I don't believe the SCAF will have the elections done, but if they did, we will all go and vote against the remains of the old regime and against the Muslim Brotherhood.
And Norhan, can you
But I don't think they will.
Norhan, can you just describe to me what's happening in the square, what you have seen?
What's happening in the square is that people are celebrating a victory. They have tried to disperse us, to kill us, to scare us off for a whole 5 days, and they failed. And now they're negotiating. They're saying we will change the government. They're giving us, again, breadcrumbs, and we will not accept that. People here are in solidarity with the revolutionaries. This is a revolution. There are no negotiations in a revolution.
Norhan, thank you for speaking to me. I know that you need to get on and meet some friends, so thank you for your contributions. Sharif, you're listening to that. What about her argument? This is a revolution. There's no time for negotiation.
Actually, it's a very interesting point. Nobody disagrees in Egypt, almost nobody disagrees that SCAF need to go, right? The question here is how should they go? The people who are against the demonstrations right now are giving the right to every single Egyptian to participate in taking the decision in choosing a ruler. And that can only be achieved through elections. I agree with the person from Libya who said it was an emotional display, and I agree it's an emotional display, and my sympathy goes to the emotional displays. But I'm afraid we are in a situation, Egypt is in a situation economically and security-wise, we cannot afford to display emotions right now. We need a decisive decision on the future of Egypt. And we need a consensus. Now, there are three parties, three big groups in Egypt. The Islamic groups who are demonstrating right now in Al-Azhar, and there are the people that are pro-SCAF that are demonstrating in Abbasiyah, and there are the Tahrir people who are against SCAF. What's the reference? How could we resolve that dispute if it's not elections?
Thank you very much for the moment. Sharif, let me jump in here and say thank you for the moment. Of course, we'll come back to you in the next few minutes. One of the extraordinary things that has been happening this year is while we can look at footage of places like Tahrir Square and the thousands of people in it, all the while they're uploading a lot of information online which helps us understand what's happening. So after we take a short break, we'll come back and look at some of the messages and the descriptions that people in that square that we're looking at now are posting up on Twitter and Facebook. Hi, I'm Ross Atkins. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on the BBC's World Have Your Say. We're discussing the situations in Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Bahrain, Yemen and Syria. A huge amount of attention on what's happening in the Arab world. I can see that BBC Monitoring has just said that Moroccan radio is reporting that voter turnout in Morocco's parliamentary election, this is for the lower house of parliament, stood at 11.5% at midday today. And I wonder if we could bring in Kareem, who's a Libyan who lives in London, to react to that. Kareem, what do you think about that? Moroccans clearly not turning out in the numbers that the king would have hoped when he delivered these reforms.
It's very interesting. I mean, Morocco's taken a very different approach in this wider Arab Spring. There haven't been the same level of same levels of violence or sort of widespread sort of uprising as we've seen in other places. But the people there are obviously very attuned to what's happening in the region, and they also want changes and reforms. And this election was a way to try and bring that forward. So I think it's a very curious situation that there wasn't the turnout. My only sort of spin on that would be that people probably don't feel that genuine change can come about from these elections. So I think we'll just have to watch that situation and see if the people there decide to take another approach. Maybe they'll see a need for protests or another sort of angle to bring about that change. But obviously they don't seem to have had that confidence in this election, and that's possibly explaining those low turnout numbers.
And it's also worth adding that that was the turnout at midday. We should look at the figure come the end of voting. Thank you very much indeed, Karim. I wonder if we could just pull up the live pictures of Tahrir Square where this protest is going on, because many of the people there are sharing information about what they're doing. Joshua Hirsch from Foreign Policy magazine tweets, petition going around the Tahrir area to choose Baradei, Abu Fotu and Hossam Essa as delegates. Mona El-Tahawi, the Egyptian-American journalist, tweets, I look across Tahrir, jam-packed, drums, chanting, and there is nowhere else I'd rather be. Egypt will be free. And Al Arabiya English has tweeted, Egypt protesters block cabinet building to prevent entry of the new prime minister, again using the hashtags Tahrir and Egypt. And of course, if you know the BBC well, we don't discuss this in English. We also are covering all the events in the Arab world on our sister station, BBC Arabic. And as we're talking about this on World Have Your Say, they are taking calls and emails and questions on BBC Arabic television. So if you do speak Arabic, you've got two options at the moment. Let's pull up a couple of messages that have come in to BBC Arabic, and we'll have a look at that. Here's the first one. You can post it, by the way, at bbcarabic.com. At the moment, we're not able to pull that up. That's a shame. In the meantime, let's bring in a couple of guests. Oh, we've got it. That's good news. Mohammed in West Riffa in Bahrain has tweeted, Bahrain's independent inquiry should silence those who say King Hamad is a tyrant. Nobody before him has ever called an independent commission. Hopefully the world will now realise how democratic Bahrain is. And that's, of course, referring to that report which came out on Wednesday, confirming that psychological and physical torture had been used on protesters while they were in detention. The king said he was horrified that reforms would be made to all of Bahrain's society, and that he would bring Bahrain's law into line with international law. Some people have said that's enough. Some people say they want far more. By the way, you can call us, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We've got Kareem, a Libyan in London. Let's bring in a couple of guests from Cairo. We've got Sharif and Norhan. The good news is Norhan has postponed going to see her friends, and she's still here, which is fantastic. Norhan, I wonder how long you can stay in this square. If the military doesn't stand aside, what are you going to do?
We're standing for as long as it takes. For the people who say that we do not want elections or that we want to overthrow the SCAF without elections, we want elections today before tomorrow. But we have been being killed for 5 days. This is how democratic the SCAF is. These are the people we're going to trust to have fair and democratic elections. We need a government that can represent us to supervise the elections. We want elections as soon as possible, but we do not want a military elections that is just about balances and negotiations and deals with certain parties. We want to be represented. We are the revolutionary youth, we have no representation, not in the parliament, not in the government. They have a new head of a government who is 81 years old. This is older than my grandfather, and I have been killed here for 5 days, not for El Ganzouri to form a government. He does not represent me or the other guys in the square.
Well, Norhan, let's put that point to Sharif. Isn't it a good point, Sharif, that this is, after all, someone who worked with Hosni Mubarak, hardly a reformer?
Right. I don't understand why are we discussing a temporary government. We're going through elections for 6 months for the parliamentary and the Shura Council elections, and then probably a couple of months more for the presidential election. The whole country is going to be doing nothing but electing a government within the coming 8 months. So what difference does it make if it's Ganzouri or Baradei or anybody else? There's not much reform going to be done in this time anyways. What we need to focus on right now is getting all Egyptians to do their say, to make their say in electing the new government, and the new elected government, the legitimate one, is the one who is going to be doing the reform. We're not putting SCAF on trial right now because SCAF is not holding on to authority.
Let's give Norhan a chance to respond. Norhan, why does it matter who's in charge now if you've got elections coming so soon?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Why does it matter who is the Prime Minister now? You have elections very soon, so everything will change.
Because we need people that we can trust to supervise the elections. Is this the Ministry of Interior that is going to secure where we go to vote? Are these the people who are supposed to count our votes? How can we trust them? These are people who are part of the old regime. They are used to forging elections. This is their jobs. This is what they did. Are we supposed to trust them again to supervise our new elections because it does not matter? No, it does. This election is the parliament that will form the constitution. I need to make sure that this is fair and democratic elections, that it's not forged, that it's not played with the results. And this government, we cannot trust it to do that.
Thank you very much, Norhan. Amir has emailed us from London. He writes, Egypt is on the way to true freedom, but not at the price of its ethics. It has to happen with patience. It cannot be rushed by the mob. The army doesn't want to control the country, but it does want to ensure a smooth transition. Sharif, I can see you nodding, and Kareem, maybe I can bring you in because, of course, you have a transition government in Libya as well. Is that a concern for you that perhaps the wrong people are in charge for the moment?
Look, I think it's a concern that all of the younger generation that initiated these Arab revolutions has. I mean, they are very, very sensitive to having the same old people coming into power, trying to cling on to power, and using different approaches and different techniques to try and achieve that. So I, as a Libyan, can very sort of strongly empathize with the Egyptians who are protesting there. And I think, you know, they seem to be willing to participate in the elections as well. You know, for me, I see these demonstrations as them exercising their democratic rights and their freedom to express themselves. So, you know, if they're not blocking these elections, from what I understand. So these elections will happen regardless. So, you know, I feel they're putting necessary pressure to make sure that this is done properly and seriously. And it's really for the Egyptians to decide how they can agree to that. But that's my interpretation of it as a Libyan, and taking my sort of experience onto that. Thank
you very much. Dilraz, who's with us from Bahrain. I'll just ask you to be patient. I'll come to you in a few minutes' time after the next break. I can see Ahmed tweeting from Tahrir Square saying, fireworks followed by cheers. We're all chanting, the people want to topple the field marshal. I also saw on Twitter people who are at the pro-SCAF rally are apparently chanting, we want the field marshal to stay. So there you have it in a nutshell where Egyptians are dividing. We'll keep on talking in a couple of minutes' time. I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, over the next 30 minutes, we'll bring you right up to date with all the main developments across the Arab world at the end of yet another extraordinary week. And of course, you're going to play a huge part in helping us do that. If you're watching in Bahrain, Libya, Morocco, Yemen, Tunisia, Syria or Egypt, we're live and your contributions are really very welcome. You can text, call, tweet, Facebook or email. Or if we do speak to you on air, don't worry, we'll pick up the bill for the call. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Well, we're across all the main hashtags being used today. That includes Tahrir and Arab Spring, also Abbasiyya, which refers to Abbasiyya Square, where the pro-army rally is going on. You can also follow me at BBC Ros Atkins on Twitter. Now, let's have a look across the latest from the region, starting in Egypt, where at least 100,000 people are in Tahrir Square demanding an end to military rule. It's been confirmed that the former Prime Minister Kamal Ganzouri is to head a new interim government and that parliamentary elections will begin on Monday. Within the last hour or so, Syria's armed forces have said that 6 elite military pilots have been killed in an ambush. In a rare televised statement, the military said the attack happened on Thursday in Homs province and marked a dangerous escalation in the conflict. Earlier today, an Arab League deadline for Syria to allow in observers passed with no response from Damascus. Outside of the Arab world, a UN envoy for North Korea has appealed for more humanitarian aid to be delivered to the country. South Korea has been sending medical supplies to the north over the past few weeks, but it won't send food. It says there's a risk that food would be diverted to feed the North Korean army. Prosecutors in the Philippines have called for the former president, Gloria Arroyo, to be moved from hospital to police detention. This follows her arrest on vote rigging charges. Mrs. Arroyo was denied permission to leave the Philippines last week when she attempted to travel for medical treatment overseas. And the Australian government is planning to establish the world's largest marine reserve in the Coral Sea. It's proposing new fishing limits and a ban on oil and gas exploration. This over an area of nearly 1 million square kilometres. Now, this is all northeast of the Great Barrier Reef, an area that is home to many unique and endangered species. We're live wherever you're watching in the world. You can call us on country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Let's have a look at the scene now in Tahrir Square. The estimates are of 100,000 plus demonstrators turning out, demanding not that elections begin on Monday. That's what the army is already promising. Not that there will be presidential elections in June next year. The army has said that is already happening. No, they're demanding the army hands over power now. And as you can see there, an ambulance, there's been an ambulance or ambulances in the square almost non-stop for the past 5 or 6 days. I can see Melissa Bell of France 24 tweeting, "Line still protecting Mahmoud Mohammed Street, or Martyrs Lane as it's being renamed." And if you've been following the situation in Cairo, you know that particular street has been the scene of some of the worst clashes between security forces and protesters. Here's some more information coming in on Twitter from the people that you're looking at there. Bozu Daragahi of the Financial Times tweets, "Crowd at the anti-Tahrir protest was quite large, with complex opinions and a varied class and demographic backgrounds, lots of children and women." This is in Abbasiyya Square, where lots of people have been turning out to support the armed forces. One more, Abigail tweeting, "Just about everyone I spoke to in Tahrir today agreed that SCAF has total control over police forces. It has the ability to stop and start violence at any time." And of course, that's been one of the big issues, hasn't it? Because the army has come out and apologised for the death of protesters, blaming police and really distancing itself from the police. All right, let's bring in a number of guests to talk with us. Alia is a young Yemeni woman. She's studying in Cairo. Dilraz is with us from Bahrain, and Omar is a Yemeni in Liverpool. And we are going to turn our attention from Egypt to Bahrain and Yemen. Maybe, Alia, I could start with you. What's been your reaction to everything that's happened this week?
I'm actually happy that the GCC deal was finally signed. I think it's a positive first step. I think the coming period is going to be very challenging. We have to make sure that it's implemented. It's one thing to sign, and it's another to make sure that it's implemented. And I think implementing the GCC deal will be the hardest part, and we still have to look forward to that and make sure that we push forward for it to be implemented.
And just to explain, GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, that was the organisation which brokered this deal, and President Saleh flew to Riyadh to sign it. And if you're wondering why I'm still calling him President Saleh, the deal stipulates he can carry that title for 90 days before it transfers to his deputy. We thought he was going to New York. I understand he's still in Saudi Arabia having medical tests. I wonder, Omar, how you've reacted to the end of Ali Abdullah Saleh's time in power.
Well, essentially, we don't see it as the end of Ali Abdullah Saleh's time in power. What we see it as a stalling measure on behalf of Ali Abdullah Saleh and the GCC, especially the likes of Saudi Arabia, who essentially are trying to thwart the Yemeni revolution and stop it.
Well, I mean, that's a very pessimistic view. Alia, do you think that Mr. Saleh could still come back and play a role?
No, I don't think Saleh is going to come back at all. I think this is the end of Saleh. But the challenge is getting rid of the body of the regime. Now we got rid of the head of the regime. We still have the regime to deal with. And I think this is the challenge. If we make sure that the GCC deal is implemented the correct way, then we will get rid of the regime. But I don't think it's a matter of Saleh anymore. I think we got rid of Saleh. Now we have to focus on the regime and make sure that the country does not go into civil war if the GCC deal is not signed.
And that's an interesting point, because on Wednesday we had celebrations in Sana'a. On Thursday in Change Square, several people died when gunmen in support of Ali Abdullah Saleh opened fire. The president then came out and condemned it, but clearly there are still some people very angry that he has been driven from power. Let's bring in a message posted on our Facebook page from John in Malawi. He writes, Saleh has done a good thing, because many leaders resort to having long civil wars before they call it quits. Sometimes we should give credit where it's due. A big hand for Saleh. Omar, do you agree with that?
Not at all. Essentially, if he signed this agreement in May, which was when it was originally proposed, instead of toying about for numerous months and being injured himself, we wouldn't be in this situation. A dictator should not be sympathised with at all. In regards to my previous point, the GCC initiative, we have in effect removed Saleh. And I doubt that he would return, considering the significant amount of political pressure on him from the US, from Saudi Arabia, and from the rest of the international community. However, what I believe personally is that the GCC initiative is a mechanism for changing the face but keeping the system, so to say.
Let's bring in Dilnaz, who's listening to the two of you talk. Dilnaz, you're a journalist based in Bahrain. Are you surprised how negative these two Yemenis are being about a week when the president was driven from power?
Well, the GCC deal has been signed, but like Ala said, you have to wait and watch to see what happens. And that only once the final result is out, you can say anything, because I can understand where they're coming from and I can understand their pessimism, and it should be expected, to be honest, because there's been, it takes lots of tries, like we can see in Egypt. It's not still final. Nothing is improving. So you need to wait and see where it actually goes before you can say you can celebrate or triumph.
Those of you watching in Yemen, do you share the cautious tone being struck by Omar and Ali? I'd be curious to hear from you. You can email worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com or call us up. We're live. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Dilnaz, we've talked about Yemen. Let's talk about your country, Bahrain. It's been an extraordinary week. We had that report out on Wednesday which confirmed that protesters had been tortured in detention. The king said he very much regretted that and promised many reforms to Bahraini society. Do you applaud what he's done?
Of course, it has to be applauded. It was historic. It was unique. It's something that's not been seen anywhere in the GCC, anywhere in the world before, where a country's leader himself asked for an independent commission, and the results show that it was truly independent. So I think it's definitely commendable, and I think the people should unite. I think the key problem in Bahrain is now the break between the people. There's this gap, there's this mistrust between the people, and that's what needs to change for real change to come by.
It's worth adding we had a funeral yesterday which turned into a protest, about 2,000 people in Bahrain, and the police opened fire with rubber bullets, also using tear gas. That's raised a lot of questions for you. I can see calls coming in from Pakistan, the UAE, Somalia, India, Kenya, Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. And we can also bring in Ali, who's on the line from Bahrain. And Ali, you didn't want your face to be shown on today's programme because you're concerned about your security, but tell us your view of this report and the King's response to it.
Well, actually, although the Bahrain Royal Commission for Inquiry didn't show the full truth about what people of Bahrain have been suffering, but actually it exposed and demonstrated all the demonstrated violations that the Bahrain Authority was denying and the government was denying for 8 months. And actually what happened is that it proved that authorized mosques were demolished, people were tortured in prison. Many civilians, it says, according to the report, of course, 30 citizens were killed, civilians. And that basis, the torture, it should refute all the convictions, and it should invalidate the right to the provision of all the detainees.
Ali, let me put that point to Dilraz. Dilraz, you're applauding the king for having admitted that this took place. Why are you not condemning him for overseeing a regime that allowed it to take place in the first place?
Of course, the condemnation, it doesn't even need to be told. No form of terrorism, no form of... there has been no state-sponsored terrorism, so to speak. There has been elements in the security forces who neglected their duties, and that needs to be punished. And the king has come forward and said that that will be done. So I think now that it's put to him in clear black and white, I am confident that he will take the steps needed to rectify it and make amends. And I think that needs to be commended. Also, I have to tell you that it's unfair that everyone keeps shouting about the security forces, torture and all of that, but nobody, I haven't heard even a single person come out and say, you know what, the opposition has made faults too. If you look at
it's not unreasonable for people to focus on the fact that pro-democracy campaigners were electrocuted and tortured in a variety of ways, is it? That seems perfectly reasonable.
I agree, but at the same time, you should have some sort of balance where you agree and where you put it out, especially a channel like the BBC, come out and say that, okay, this is what the report says, not just one part of it. You should highlight both sides of it.
I think I did say in my introduction that the king has committed to a number of widespread reforms. He's also said he's going to bring Bahrain law in line with international law. If all of you watching want a great deal more detail on that report, more detail than I can give you in a couple of minutes here on World Have Your Say, do go to bbc.com/news. Dilnaz, good to have you back on World Have Your Say. Thanks to you. Thanks to Ali as well in Bahrain. Lots and lots of you are calling in. Let's cross to Nuala, who's with the World Have Your Say team, taking your calls. What are we hearing, Nuala?
Well, we're getting a slightly lower response than usual on the phones, but a lot from different parts of Egypt and the rest of Africa, most recently Gambia, Malawi and Cameroon. But there's by no means unanimous support for the protesters in Tahrir Square. Abdullani in Nigeria called to say they're troublemakers, and there were plenty that called in to agree with him. Now, how about this? Haitham in Cairo got in touch. He says, I'd like to say that those people in Tahrir Square do not represent all of the Egyptians, but the silent majority of Egypt want stability for this country. Marwa also got in touch in Egypt and called to suggest having some caution. She said, we're for the protest in general, but the protesters need proper direction. So that's really the main thrust coming through. Join them in the conversation by following the contact details on your screen now, or indeed use the hashtag WHYS.
Thank you very much indeed, Nuala. Interesting that most of you calling in want to talk about Egypt, in which case we'll return to the situation there. Two protests happening in Cairo, one for, one against the military council. We'll show you some more live pictures in a couple of minutes here on BBC World News. I'm Ross Atkins. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on the BBC's World Have Your Say. We're live and discussing the situations across the Arab world, particularly focusing on Egypt, which is where most of you are calling from, and also those of you outside of Egypt are also calling up to talk about what's happening there. I can see that AFP is reporting that protesters have blocked the entrance to Egypt's cabinet HQ this Friday afternoon in a bid to prevent Mr. Ganzouri, that's the man who's going to lead the new interim government in Egypt. They're trying to stop him from getting in the building. The organiser of the protest said it was to protest against his appointment, and of course those protesters don't want any more interim governments. They want the military to stand down and for elections to take place very, very soon. Now, Paul in Victoria in Australia has been commenting on the Herald Sun newspaper's website. He writes, a French woman says she was sexually assaulted whilst covering the protest. The mob rule mentality runs riot, and some of these men clearly have no respect for women. Well, Paul, if you're watching, I've also seen a number of tweets today saying that the harassment of women in the square is more organised than it's been all week long. I wonder if we could bring in Norhan, an Egyptian woman, with us in Tahrir Square. We've also got Alia, who is a Yemeni in Cairo, as well as Kareem, a Libyan in London. Norhan, there are repeat reports now that women are being harassed by the anti-military protesters. How do you explain that to us?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Lots of people are concerned that women are being harassed in Tahrir Square. How can you explain that to us?
Well, there has been reported cases of sexual harassment, but we think it is some sort of the military police forces dressed as civilians, and they're getting into try to scare off Egyptian girls from joining the protests. But we're not afraid, and our guys, they are protecting us, and we will stand for any sort of thugs, whether they're sexual harassers or people with weapons or stones or whatever. We can protect ourselves. We are used to protecting ourselves because there is no police. We do not trust the police to protect us. The police only kills us.
So you're blaming the police. It's some people who say they've seen harassment say it's not the police, it's the protesters. I wonder if I can ask the World Have Your Say director to pull up the picture of Tahrir Square full screen so we can have a look at it, because it looks like there are fireworks going off. There we go, fireworks going off, many hundreds of thousands of people gathered with flags waving. We saw ambulances earlier. Just as I show you the bigger picture, the fireworks stop, but if they start going off again, we'll certainly go back to them. Alia, you're a Yemeni living in Cairo. What's your response to these reports that women are being harassed by big groups of men in Tahrir Square?
I'm really disturbed to hear that. I mean, I have lived in Cairo during the January 25th revolution, and that was not the case. There were no harassments at all. In fact, everyone was praising how people were behaving in Tahrir Square. So I'm really disturbed to hear this, and it makes us scared to go to Tahrir Square, honestly.
And a woman called Sarah has tweeted in the last hour or so, haven't felt this unsafe on my own in the square before. Harassment today is almost organised. And I suppose this plays, Kareem, into the idea that some people are sending into the BBC that we shouldn't see the protesters as the good guys and the military as the bad guys. It's not as simple as that. And perhaps those pushing for change, not just in Egypt, but in other Arab countries, maybe don't always have the best of intentions.
I mean, this is a very interesting point. This is something that, as a Libyan, we experienced this quite a few different times, people questioning the intentions or sincerity of the people. You know, I think it's really sort of a very poor argument. I think if you look at somewhere like Tahrir Square, there's tens of thousands of people. If you have any kind of grouping of that number of people almost anywhere in the world, there are bound to be, you know, dangerous or criminal elements or unsavory elements. That's just human nature. So,
Kareem, thank you very much indeed for contributing. Alia and Norhan, we appreciate your contributions too. Nihal says protesters gathering in front of the parliament near Tahrir Square denying Gamzouri the right to be the next Prime Minister. This story will run and run, I'm sure. Let's finish today's World Have Your Say with this picture of Tahrir Square right now.
Наши антигравитал.